why don't you outline for us the kind of scope of what I'll just call the Crusader project and the
Yeah.
longevity of it, and some of the key people involved, both naming names of people and organizations. If that takes the whole program, so be it. Take your time, lay it out. We're having a cup of coffee on a plane. I've never heard of any of this stuff. Explain it to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a vast, powerful, well-funded network that I think it's really hard to even know where to begin with that question. But I'm going to begin with where you mentioned in that quote. I'm going to begin with the Supreme Court and the capture of the United States Supreme Court by this movement, because I think that is absolutely crucial. One of the things that I really try to drive home for folks is that the conservative justices on the Supreme Court are not impartial jurists that are carefully working to determine the meaning of a constitutional provision without any bias, right? You don't pack a court, you don't capture a court to do that. So I've said crusaders a few times, you define that term. I'll narrow it down slightly to the legal groups that make up this billion-dollar shadow network. So we're talking about groups like Alliance Defending Freedom, the American Center for Law and Justice, the Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, Liberty Counsel, First Liberty Institute, kind of this Orwellian word salad. And these are the groups that are filing lawsuit after lawsuit. They're the ones, the crusaders, who are setting up the cases that the conservative justices can come knock down. And that accelerates once Trump took over. And honestly, it begins to look a lot like collusion, especially when we find out that these same groups and donors are wining and dining justices on private super yachts and on private jets and on island hopping vacations, none of which were disclosed, right? So the man who is sort of universally recognized now as the man responsible for orchestrating the hostile takeover of the Supreme Court is Leonard Leo.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the best place to begin. So, and a former employee described Leonard Leo's mission like this. And I want everybody to understand this. Quote, he figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception, conservatives didn't stand a chance if public opinion prevailed. So they needed to stack the courts. Okay, didn't stand a chance if public opinion prevailed, so they needed to stack the courts. That is what they did. And the reason this is so crucial and why it's so important to understand that mission is because it is professedly anti-democratic, right? They are admitting that what they are trying to do is subvert democracy. That is the goal. If they don't stack the court, the majority is going to rule. If they don't stack the court, democracy is going to work, right? So that is why they targeted the Supreme Court for this hostile takeover, why they tried to pack the court with crusaders. And overall, we know that Leo's groups spent $540 million. That's $500 million that we know of trying to pack the court from 2014 to 2020. And you just simply do not spend that kind of money to buy an impartial court, right? Like that's not the goal when you're spending $500 million. You don't just want impartial jurists. They bought a court. They bought one branch of our government. And one more thing that I think is useful for people to understand is Leo's job in this fight to capture the court. He was described as, quote, the monitor of the nominee's ideological purity. And that means the judicial nominees. Sure. And this is the guy who is responsible for the confirmation of John Roberts, Sam Alito, Neil Gorsuch, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Right? That's 5 justices on the Supreme Court. Thomas is an old friend of his. Leo was actually with Thomas while he was being confirmed and going through that fight to get on the Supreme Court. Sure. All 6 of them are or were members of the Federalist Society. So that's 6 votes on the Supreme Court. And Leo personally chose 5 of them for their crusader ideology.